Hey, welcome to the Worderella Writes podcast with me, Belinda. I write and illustrate cozy fantasy romance, and this is a little sneak behind the scenes. I am so glad you're here today. Well, hello everybody, and here we are with episode 2 of Worderella Writes. So this is going to be interesting. So we're technically speaking, at the end of this episode, 20% of the way through the season, which is kind of cool. This is also why I made the season so short, because that's achievable for someone who also works full-time and parents and has other family and also happens to, write books and illustrate them for funsies. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about why there is an 11-year gap between Haunting Miss Trentwood and Miss Preston's Predicament, which is the short story that kicked off the whole, I could make this into a series. But first, I want to chat about a book I just read, devoured actually. I read it in 1 day, 1.5 days maybe. It's called Colonel Darcy. It's by Timothy Underwood. Now, this is one of those instances where Instagram got me. The Instagram algorithm ads algorithm totally got me. I have read every book by Abigail Reynolds. She focuses on Pride and Prejudice variations. You guys, I had no idea this was an entire genre unto itself until a couple of years ago. And I talk enough about Abigail's work that I guess the Instagram algorithm decided, hey, let me show you Timothy Underwood's work. I think right now he has a sale where if you go straight to his website, you can buy direct and get 10 of his books for 50% off. So you get 10 books for $30 American, something like that. So anyway, I think I read 2 paragraphs of one of his books and I was like, okay, take my money, just take all of it. I want to read all of this. And Colonel Darcy, oh my God. I wouldn't call it cozy. It is definitely not cozy, but it is a compelling take on what would have happened if Darcy and Lizzie were friends as children. What would have happened if Mr. Bennet died. And Darcy actually was the second son and went to war, became a prisoner of war. So it is not a cozy read, but it is a compelling read. And by the end of the book, you are just, rooting for these two so hard. And I finished the book and I immediately started searching, does Mr. Underwood have social media? Where can I follow this man? I cannot believe what he did with Darcy and Lizzie. And I can't wait to read the other 9 books. So if you're looking for something that's definitely more of a straight historical romance, Colonel Darcy by Timothy Underwood is fantastic. So today we're going to chat a little bit about the Hesitant Medium series and why it took 11 years. So first off, I wrote Haunting Miss Trentwood back in 2010, or at least that's when I published it. And I just had this silly idea of this woman. She's a spinster. She's been taking care of her father. Her father passes away. And rather than leaving her alone with her books in the middle of the countryside, he then comes back to haunt her because he has decided she's probably going to sit in her library and read her books and not live her life. I still feel that sitting in a library and reading books all day, every day is definitely a way to live your life. But he also knows that Mary, who's the heroine of Haunting Miss Trentwood, had a chance at romance and he kind of spoiled it for her. So it's kind of like his unfinished business. He wants to come back and help her break out of her shell and find someone that's a good match for her. So I always wanted Haunting Miss Trentwood to be a series. I did not know how to do it though. When I say there's an 11-year gap, it's because I did not know how to make Haunting Miss Trentwood into a series. Now, I think now looking back, it's because I was reading a lot of fantasy series, and especially the fantasy series that I was reading, it requires a story arc across the entire series. So book 1, book 2, book 3, you read them all together and you get the entire story. I had fallen out of the habit of reading romance stories or romance series. Mimi Matthews is an excellent example of this. She writes historical romance series. They're basically all 4-book series, where, each character is related, main character is related to the other characters of the other books in the series, but you're reading a distinct standalone romance. And I had just completely forgotten this was a thing, right? So, it's the middle of the night in, 2021. I am up in the middle of the night, parenting in the middle of a pandemic. Well, the quarantine at least. And I'm sitting there and I'm holding my kiddo, and all of a sudden this image flashes past my face. Like, it was the most bizarre thing. I saw this mixed chick, Victorian woman in a yellow dress, just like do a little backflip because she's fighting a ghost, like a Sailor Moon backflip or like a Buffy backflip. It was like a very 90s fantasy CW, WB type moment. And I just remember thinking, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. I am so tired. I'm fairly certain I'm hallucinating, but man, wouldn't that be cool to write a story about that chick? So Miss Preston's Predicament really came out of that. I wanted to figure out why was she, dodging ghosts and wearing this really nice yellow dress, and, what's happening around her? How does she get into this situation? So that's how Miss Preston's Predicament happened. And then I realized, wait a minute, if I'm going to write about another story set in Victorian England about ghosts, I've got to find a way to tie it back to Haunting Miss Trentwood. And I was sitting there, and I had just finished writing the short story, and I thought, here's the thing. Both of these women wish they didn't have to speak to ghosts. It's just something that happened to them, so now they do speak with ghosts. So I was looking at things like the reluctant medium, and I decided on the hesitant mediums because, one, it just kind of felt right. And all of a sudden, like, as soon as I landed on hesitant mediums, all of these ideas just started pouring onto the page. So I ended up writing a part of A Spirited Engagement. That section I actually took out of the book and made that into the other short story that's between Haunting Miss Trentwood and A Spirited Engagement, and that's called An Inconvenient Seance. So not only do you get Tessa's backstory in between, our very distinct Haunting Miss Trentwood, and the true kickoff of the series is A Spirited Engagement. So we have Miss Preston's Predicament, which is all about what is Tessa doing, leading right up to that book. And then we have An Inconvenient Seance, which is what happened to Jasper in between Haunting Miss Trentwood and when he starts his own romantic adventure in A Spirited Engagement. So that's kind of the fun thing, is I often will start writing scenes and then I realize, oh no, this is not going to fit. Like, this is backstory for the actual novel. I'll take it out. I'll cut it out. It's something I needed to write to understand the characters, to understand the plot, to know where we were starting and where we wanted to end up. But it's not necessary for the actual book itself. So what I've been doing is then I take these snippets and I make them into short stories, and those short stories become little bridges between the novels. I am currently working on book number 3, which is called An Uncanny Bargain. We'll get into reasons later why it's called that. But the really fun part is, if you've seen, I was in 2 anthologies last year, and both anthologies published the short story that happens between A Spirited Engagement and An Uncanny Bargain, and that one is called Her Pilfering Phantom. Her Pilfering Phantom. I can talk. I can use words. And so that story, and I'm breaking rules, right? Because that story kind of sort of introduces our heroine for book 3. We do meet her at the end of book 2, so it's not like but we get to learn more about Edith in Her Pilfering Phantom. We get a side romance with some favorite characters, and it's amazing how just writing the short story really helped me laser in on exactly who Edith is and some of her struggles and some of her opportunities. And so I cannot wait to dive back into book number 3. I'm actually going to be joining a local write-in the day this episode airs. So, just imagine me sitting in a library somewhere surrounded by other writers, listening to some form of ambient YouTube video that, sounds like you're walking through a forest, but it gets like more magical and more creepy as time goes on, because that seems to be the vibe that I need. So anyway, if you have any questions that you would like me to answer in the podcast, let me know. But in the meantime, I would love to ask you a question, and that question is there a part of the hesitant medium's world, or the Victorian setting in general, that you'd like me to explore more in detail? As always, I'm so glad to have you guys here. It's definitely a new adventure to be attempting a podcast, but I know that I ask or think similar questions about my favorite authors. How did they do that? How did they come up with that? Why did we wait so long between books? So I figured, hey, let's try this as an experiment and see how it goes. So thanks again for listening. And if you have any great books, especially if they're Pride and Prejudice variations, please let me know, because there will never be enough Pride and Prejudice variations for me in this world. I intend to devour all of them. Thanks for joining me today. You can find my signed and illustrated editions, bookish merch, and bullet journals for writers on my website, worderella.com. Regular editions of my fiction are available at libraries and all major retailers. Worderella Writes runs as a single annual season with roughly 10 episodes running from January to April each year. Connect with me, Belinda Kroll, through the reader poll in the show description, on Instagram as Worderella, on Patreon as Worderella, or my website, worderella.com. That's Cinderella, but with words. If you enjoyed this episode, support the podcast by sharing it with a friend, leaving a 5-star rating and review, and subscribing so you never miss an episode. And until next time, take care, and may all your mood reads be excellent.